Hello and happy Friday. Welcome to Intentional Conversations podcast. I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her. I am the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC, and we are so glad that you are here with us today, a part of our community. We hope that you will enjoy today's show. We know that we have been very intentional to curate great content, great conversation, and we are just so glad that you're a part of today's experience. We ask that you go to the chat. Let us know where you are joining the conversation from. It is always a treat for us to see the many different geographies that are represented across the US and even beyond of individuals that join us to be a part of today's discussion. I also want you to know that at NWC, we really do value disability inclusion. And as such, we have closed caption feature that has been enabled for those who may find benefit in that feature. We also have many people that will join our program, not just by the Zoom community, but also just from LinkedIn Live. And so for those of you who are joining us via LinkedIn Live, I want to shout you out. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. You can certainly leverage the comment section to let us know your thoughts, your sentiments, any curiosities that are percolating or questions throughout our dialogue today. My team is watching that closely and they're bringing into our Zoom discussion all of those expressions so that we can be connected as one large community. I want you to know that here at NWC, we also are very particular about making sure we can get this rich content out to a broad audience in many different ways. One of the ways in which we do that is we will extract the audio from our podcast experience every week, and we will make the show available in podcast capacity for those who like to get their content on the go. So many ways for us to be connected. Once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations podcast, and we look forward to engaging with you throughout this hour. Let the conversations begin indeed, and that is precisely what we're about to do. I want to welcome you once again. And I also want to share with you that this is a milestone year for Intentional Conversations podcast. We are celebrating 5 years, yay, 5. And that is no small feat. The team has worked tirelessly over the past 5 years to bring this virtual production experience to the broader community so that we all can deepen our understanding of all things diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility, justice, right? All the things under that broad umbrella and intersect it with conversations of leadership and business. We're going to be celebrating all year long, and I will momentarily tell you about a special opportunity that you are invited to help us celebrate 5 years of intentional conversations. But first, it is the month of April, and as we normally do at NWC, we like to make sure that you are aware of some national observances that take place throughout this month. And there are many. First of all, April is Black Women's History Month. And so I definitely want to make sure that I take an opportunity to acknowledge and shout out all of the Black women who are contributing at so many ways to our society. Find a Black woman in your network and make sure she knows that she is valued, that she is appreciated, and that she is enough. Also, this month of April is National Arabic American Heritage Month. And so this is also a reminder for us just to build up our cultural humility, to learn about other cultures and backgrounds, and allow us to be able to stand in solidarity with the needs of all individuals as humans. I think that's the importance of oftentimes these national observances. So we're going to make sure we do that. Another opportunity that I think is important to put into your hearing is that Stress Awareness Month is April. And I can tell you that we need to be really mindful about stress awareness, not just in April, but all year long. When I think about all that we're navigating right now, we are certainly finding ourselves navigating very stressful moments. And I want us to be aware of self-care. How can we make sure that we're doing all of the appropriate strategies to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves? And so make sure that you are using this time to get radical about your self-care. Black Maternal Health Week is also taking place in the month of April, and specifically it's April the 11th through the 17th. We know that all the statistics have shown that there is great disparity in the health that's received of Black mothers versus other communities. And so I think it's important for us to lean in to continuing to bring awareness to this issue. We need for our Black mothers to be able to go home with their babies healthy, right? And so let's make sure that we're doing our part to continue to bring awareness to the issues that are present in that space. Now, one of the things that I love to often do is to share with you some of the resources we make available at NWC to our broader community. I am a 4 times LinkedIn Learning instructor, and I have 4 courses that are out there available for you and any others in your network that you think would be available to seek some additional information as they're putting tools in their toolbox. And so I hope that you'll check out these LinkedIn Learning courses. And I happened to check earlier this week, and I noticed that we have over 81,000 learners that have taken our courses so far. And I just want to extend much gratitude to many of you for being a part of our community and for seeing our resources as something that's valuable. For those of you who aren't familiar, I also have a book out. It's called Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI. That is in partnership with Forbes Books. And it's in paperback, it's in hard copy, it's in audio, so many different ways in which you can get this content. But I would love to be in communication with you about how you can bring a learning experience to your organization on Inclusion Uncomplicated. Now, I said at the beginning that this is our 5th year for Intentional Conversations and that I would be sharing with you momentarily a special opportunity for you to help us celebrate. This year, every quarter, in addition to every Friday during this hour where we do the live Intentional Conversations, we're also doing a special evening episode that we are referring to as a reunion episode. We're bringing back past guest co-hosts to be in community with us again to have conversation and dialogue. And the next one is April 15th from 6 to 7 p.m. My team will drop into the chat a link for you to register for free. There's never a cost to attend these Intentional Conversations with us. And our guest co-host that particular day is going to be John Graham and Emmanuel Kulu. I'm really looking forward to reconnecting with these gentlemen. I hope that you will be in attendance. And on Friday, April the 18th, we have Mickey Bay. Mickey Bay is a friend. She's also an emotional regulation coach, and she is going to be coming and in conversation with me about all things that's going to help us to learn how to self-soothe. I think that's appropriate for the fact that we're talking about April is Stress Awareness and Management Month, right? But she's going to give us a lot of tips and tricks that I think that's going to be really useful for us to understand how to show up at our best in ways in which we can control, right? So Mickey Bay on the 18th. And then closing out the month of April, we have my friend Jill Littlejohn Bostic, and she is going to be sharing with us in that intentional conversation, measuring cultural impact and embedding belonging into leadership. So I hope that you're marking your calendars and that you will be present to join us for the intentional conversation episodes taking place this month. Now, I'm at the point in time where it gives me great honor and pleasure to give a formal introduction of today's guest co-host. And if you've been with us for quite some time, you know there's a special approach that we take to this. We want our community to understand the accolades, the credentials, the experiences in which our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation with. And so reading the bio is a great way to do that. So I'm going to do that at this time. Amri B. Johnson is a social capitalist, epidemiologist, entrepreneur, and inclusion strategist with over 20 years of experience helping organizations achieve extraordinary outcomes. As CEO and founder of Inclusion Wins and former global head of cultural intelligence and inclusion at Novartis Research Division, he specializes in building inclusive systems that enable organizations to become anti-fragile. Originally from Kansas, Amri is the author of Reconstructing Inclusion, Making DEI Accessible, Actionable, and Sustainable. His work spans the US and Brazil, and he currently resides in Basel, Switzerland, with his family. So yes, he's joining us from Switzerland. So let's now grab those words of affirmation, grab those emojis, those reactions as I stop sharing my screen and bring in our guest co-host into the spotlight. I'm adding him now. I want you all to make sure that you allow our guest to feel welcome. Let him know how much we appreciate him sharing with us all the way from Switzerland. We don't take it lightly when people say yes to our invitation. And as such, we are just really excited to engage in dialogue with you. Now, before I release you, though, Amri, to be able to greet this audience in your own way, we do have a tradition here. And that tradition is that we ask our guest co-host to share with us something that we would not know from hearing the bio, which we've just done, right? Or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. So welcome. Thank you for being here. And I'll turn it over to you to greet this audience.
Oh, Nika, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here on a evening with you where I sit. And So something people wouldn't know about me. Um, I've been an entrepreneur longer than I ever worked for anyone. And so most of my career has been as an entrepreneur, external to companies, but working with companies, working with government agencies. But when I first started my businesses, the early ones, um, my focus was actually more on my spiritual development than it was on my business acumen.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the way I do business is very much informed by, you know, certain virtues that I believe are sacrosanct, and
Mhm.
I don't compromise them. And
Oh,
so those are kind of at the heart of how and what I do. And so far they've worked. It doesn't mean it's always been easy, but it's actually allowed me to do my best work, I believe, and also do it in a way that goes beyond just the head. It actually goes to our heart connection, not necessarily just our physical one, but that kind of that energy where you can make the kind of connection that lasts and people can feel. And I've been able to have feel that myself reciprocally. So that's probably the one thing is my spiritual development has outweighed in many cases my business development. And hopefully at this point, my business development is starting to catch up.
I love that. And as a person of faith and someone who is very devout in her Christianity, is part of our virtues, is part of our values. And so it certainly intersects with how in which we show up to the way in which we do our vocation. So I am with you on that. And I appreciate your authenticity in sharing that today. I think that it makes a big difference. So let's jump right into talking about your history. I want to give our audience an understanding of what brought us to where we are right now. And I'm talking about in this space of diversity, equity, and inclusion in this industry, in this discipline. There's been a lot happening, right, over the past several months, and we continue to see evolution and change occur every single day. What do you think is the premise of what we're seeing right now in terms of how volatile and difficult navigating the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is, and how are you showing up in this moment to continue to sustain the work?
It's a good question. I mean, what's going on now in the world is just completely, I don't know if I can say this, it's kind of AS crazy. So it is kind of a pandemonium, chaos in a way that I think very few of us have encountered in our
Yes.
lives, maybe in our, at least in our careers. It's a place where people are feeling a certain a lot, quite a bit of anxiety. I know I've felt anxiety, and it's not something
Yeah.
that I've really felt before, to be honest with
Yeah.
you. It just
Yeah.
I'd never, like, I had friends that have gone through it, like anxiety at a high level, and I've
Mhm.
always been sympathetic, but I never could fully empathize, but I can.
Sure.
So I think when you're there, when you're in the midst of chaos, the best thing to do is act. You can spend a lot of time on talking about what's wrong and, what you think is the moral thing. And that's all good. I think we can do that with each other just to have that space to clear. But the most important thing is, are we in action? And are we in action the best we can with what we have right now?
Yeah.
And just put stuff out there and see what's working for clients, what's working for communities, what's working for colleagues in ways maybe that we hadn't before. So I think, yeah, where we are now is in the midst of a storm. And when you're in the midst of a storm, I remember I went through a pretty hard time years ago. My best friend and I were talking, and he said, man, you're in the middle of a tornado and you're not a shaman. So if you're not a shaman and you can't calm the tornado, you just have to run. So right now we have to, run to the kind of shelter that is not avoiding the problem, but it's leaning into it in a way that allows us to actually control what we can. And so it's in the midst of chaos, you act and you learn and you sense and you respond to that, and then you do it again. So
Yeah.
yeah, we're not going to move out of the chaos anytime soon. It's how do we support each other and how do we stay in motion during the process?
So well stated. And I think that when I think about shelter, what comes to mind for me is community. Being in community and that level of connectedness, I think is what's going to be important during the times where we are finding our nervous system being activated by this high level of anxiety, as we are witness to what's happening and we are, directly being impacted what's happening. I'm mindful that, of course, I started by sharing that you reside in Switzerland. But yet and still, you're from Kansas, and so obviously you're keeping a close pulse, I would imagine, on what's happening here in the States. But I would love for you just to give our community here some insight into what are the things that are top of mind for Switzerland right now as it relates to this broad topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am keenly aware that there are certain dimensions of diversity that may be more relevant and applicable based upon where you are in the world, right? But what are you hearing right now?
I mean, I think because my practice has mostly been focused on inclusion,
Hmm.
um, and mostly focused on how do you deal with the tension and complexity of difference and similarity, as Roosevelt Thomas would define diversity, is how do we work through it? What skills do we need? What capabilities do we need to do that in a consistent way?
Hmm.
And in a way that when we experience what we're experiencing right now, the stress, we can actually work through it, see into the future, have prospection best we can, and hopefully get better as a result of it. So in Switzerland and probably in Europe, I think the focus has historically, a lot of the focus was on uh, gender, and mostly sex women has been the predominant focus. I can't say
Hmm.
that I've been like right there doing all the stuff to promote more women in X particular industry, but I have been working on the systems that can make sure that when women get into these organizations and continue to advance their careers, that the conditions are right for everybody, but
Yes.
particularly for those who historically haven't been able to push through. So what are we doing to put enablers in there so that everybody can do their best work and thrive? And so I've been focused on that probably more than a particular identity, but
Hmm.
that's that. But women has been a big thing here. The focus on disability has been actually quite robust here, and you know, because I've been more focused on inclusion, Nika, and I haven't been as kind of invested in group identities.
Hmm.
What was interesting, I had a pretty intense situation happen to me in 2022. My
Hmm.
niece, who I partially raised because my brother passed when she was really young, and she lived with me when I was still living in Boston, and she had a near fatal car crash,
Wow.
and she lost her lower right leg. And so
Mm.
I can tell you in that moment of like flashing through my public health career, Mass General Brigham was a client of mine. She was at a Mass General Brigham facility, and I was still anxious that they weren't going to treat her well.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
like they treated her fantastically, and she's back living in Kansas near my mother, and she's
That's
doing
great.
great. She's about to get back in school because she still wants to be a dentist. Right now she's a dental assistant, but it
Okay.
brought the notion of disability to me in ways that I'd never experienced. And I think when you get close to something like that, you're seeing the world very different. Like my niece
Yeah.
like complained about her shoe for her prosthetic foot, and I'm like, what? I would have never thought about something like that. But those are the things that having that experience with her, going through that with her, woke me up to things that I probably wasn't as aware of. And now when I see people doing work that actually is really good around disability, I'm like, oh, and I talk to her about it. So
Yeah.
it's that's one thing that's probably been in my brought to my attention more than other things in the past few years.
Well, first, I am so glad to hear that your niece is doing well and that she has, she's definitely on the mend, and she's gotten through the most traumatic portion of that experience. But I think that you're right. Every time I talk to many people, Omri, often their call to this work is due to some type of lived experience or proximity to a lived experience that has impacted them in a way to where they want it to be more of a vocal activists and advocates who try to change systems. And so I appreciate when you said earlier that your work has been more on impacting the change within the systems, because that's where I really think the needle gets moved, right? You know, we can do all that we can on our own account as individuals to within our control, but that sometimes only can get us but so far. We
Yeah.
need people that are really working on how do we shift these systems, and that is not something that happens overnight. It is definitely a process. So talk about this acknowledgement of disabilities as part of dimensions of diversity that definitely needs to be amplified. I don't know about you, Omri, but I have been a part of conversations where practitioners in this space have been, for the lack of a better word, criticized for not unearthing disability to the same level and extent of other dimensions of diversity. And I just want to call that out. I think that we have, as a community of practitioners, we've gotten better over the years. And I think that it is continuing, but it's such a big conversation simply because when we think about disabilities, it's not just from a standpoint of visible disabilities, but there are a litany of invisible disabilities that also impact how in which people show up to the workplace, how they interact, how they make decisions, right? How opportunities are maybe gifted to them or even provided for them to be able to pursue, right? And so I just want to give you a chance to kind of comment on that and maybe what you're seeing in terms of this increased amplification of disability as a dimension of diversity that needs and should have, good attention being given to it.
Yeah, I think, depending on where you are in your organization and including when this, using my case, the family members of people in your respective organizations, I think you need to make sure people know that the resources are there for them to get what they need to do their best work. So for me,
Yeah.
it always goes back is what are we doing and building into the systems to enable people to thrive? And if that means we're missing something from a particular dimension of somebody's identity, and that's causing some type of barrier that
Yeah.
we need to be mindful of or move, then that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
I think people are more than just that particular part of who they are. And I think we have to, if we, whenever we do in organizational life, if we want to address something, we have to address it as the whole human. So my niece is not her prosthetic, right?
Yes.
Um, my niece is uh, she's Jasmine. I have nicknames for her, but if she ever saw this, she'd be embarrassed. So I won't
It was
say it.
embarrassing. Keep it at Jasmine. Shout out to Jasmine.
Exactly. She's fun and she's super compassionate and she's bisexual and she's um, you know, into old school hip hop like her old uncle is. Like she's a lot of different things. And I think what people want you to be able to do is honor whatever can help them thrive. And if it happens to be one particular part of their identity, you do that. So I think what people have done here, um, particularly around the unseen disabilities, is actually bring it to the surface more than I'd ever seen it before. And actually, when I was inside of Novartis, there was an ERG that was focused on they called it diversibility,
Yeah.
and we actually brought people to have these conversations in ways that said what are the things that can be enablers, but it's all on an individual basis because some people like my niece, for example, she wouldn't even tell people she had a prosthetic. She wouldn't tell people that she was an amputee unless they either ask or they saw and they're like, wait a minute, something's different. Maybe well, I didn't know she was walking like that for that reason, right? they wouldn't know. Like you just wouldn't know, right? And so she doesn't like to bring it to people's attention. She's had to at times. And so some people want to just know that the support is there. And that's what I found out a lot when I was in the working with the disability group. They just found ways to let people know these things were there. These resources are available. There's community for you for if you have something come up. How to talk to your employer about one of those hidden disabilities, like people that were
Yeah.
disabled temporarily. Like, how do you make sure that they have what they need so that they can get back to full health and not have this pressure that they're going to lose their job or be discounted because of what was going on in their lives or in their physical body. So all those
Mm,
things I think are absolutely critical, and all of them lead back to our common humanity being honored and people getting what they need to make their best contribution to the organizational mission.
absolutely. Absolutely. Let's get back to the basics of humanity. And part of humanity is, making way without the hassle of an individual to show up at their best, to thrive, to have full opportunity for success. And so thank you for naming that. I want to just highlight a couple of things that's coming up for me, Omri, based upon what you just shared. The first thing is that neurodiversity is often one of those categories of of disability diversity that we don't think about, because so many times those individuals that may be on the spectrum, we don't see evidence of that, disability, right? And I think that's why it's become such a growing topic of discussion within organizations, and why we're seeing this increased number of ERGs, BRGs forming specifically for that community. And one of the things that I have learned throughout the years is that if you are able to get proximate as possible to those individuals' lived experiences, not saying those individuals, I'm putting myself in this as well, then that is when you're able to really strengthen your level of understanding. And then through that, you're strengthening your empathy and your compassion. That helps to create deepened relationships and connectivity, which helps to spark greater productivity through more effective collaboration. I mean, there's so many reasons that it is important for us to lean into this beyond humanity, which I'll start there because it is the most important one. But even just from a workplace culture perspective, I also think about the fact that many times people with disabilities may not feel a sense of safety in disclosing information about themselves, right? And one, it could be just, attitudinal. Maybe they don't think that it's relevant. And sometimes, most times, it's not. But then other times, it's the stigma that maybe I feel like I'm alone. Maybe I'm going to be othered. Maybe someone will then start, coming up with these preconceived notions of what I can and cannot do, right? And that it can maybe work against them. So they don't socialize around it. What I love about the organizations who are really meeting the moment of this population of people is that when you are willing to form an ERG or a BRG with people with disabilities, or even people that specifically, because I've seen neurodiversity ERGs, BRGs, what you're saying is that we welcome individuals of those populations and communities to this organization. And I think there's no better way than to let someone be seen and valued and heard, than to know that I'm not alone and I am welcome here. And so I just wanted to kind of amplify that as a point. I want to move ahead now, and I want to talk about the emergent inclusion framework. So this should be familiar to you because this is your framework. I would love to understand a little bit more about it, and why is it important now more than ever? So share with our community about the emergent inclusion framework.
Well, I can give a little longer version than I give when I give my elevator pitch, but the elevator pitch is it's it's an approach to build the skills and capabilities that allow individuals in your organization and your organizational culture as a whole to bounce higher from stressors, from difficult times, to what one might call, based on Nassim Taleb's work, as being anti-fragile or anti-fragility. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's that set of capabilities that allows you to move through the the most important challenges and not just get back to the baseline. Like after COVID, like some people got back to the baseline, some companies, some people got stronger, right? And so
Yes.
like the skills and capabilities in the emergent inclusion framework are all about how do we build that capacity to get stronger through stressors. And so we start really, and this is where I think it's important based on where we are right now for the DEI space, or I focus and probably anchor more on inclusion, but it doesn't mean that the D and the E go away. um,
They're all connected, yes.
yes, absolutely. I think we over the past few years, we have not necessarily taken into account the potential trade-offs from some of the way we've done this work.
Mm.
And it
Sure.
was all, I believe the majority of people did it all in good faith.
Mhm.
And as one of my favorite economists says, Thomas Sowell says, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. So a lot of times we were going in with a solution based on what we felt was happening to a group identity. Didn't mean it was untrue. There were lots of
Yeah.
things that were negative happening to certain communities, but the way we went about doing that didn't really consider the trade-offs. And I think what we're dealing with now, beyond the absolute craziness that's going on in Washington, I think
I think
the
that's Switzerland right now. You can say that.
the precursors to that that brought us to where people are making DEI about, unqualified brown people, which it's
Yeah,
never been, but
absolutely.
it
Yes,
has
yes,
been heavily focused on racialization, and to
yes,
an extent that we weren't always as prudent about what that meant and who that was for as we could have been. So I think there were practitioners like yourself that went into this and said, this is about everybody. And there were others that were like, no, we want, we're looking for reparative justice. And that's the way it is. And that's what you're going to give us. There was a demand there. Get it. And there's trade offs to that.
hmm,
And
absolutely.
so I think if your approaches to inclusion DEI are based on principles, and we're in a paradigm that's about the all and the we, not the this group or that group. It's as Snoop says, it ain't nothing but a G thing. I say it ain't nothing but a we thing.
Yeah,
When it was about the we versus the us or whatever group you considered you had the most affinity with. I think
yes,
when we did that, we're creating more contact. We're building the skills to work through the tensions of our differences. We can talk about what's there, and we can anchor on things that aren't just single identities. We can anchor on what people might call intersectionality or
absolutely.
multidimensionality. That we're all something bigger than any group that we're part of as far as our identities are concerned. So at the anchor of the emergent inclusion framework is how do we put the right principles in place, the right paradigms, and then what are the pathways we need to put in place to get there? So what are the paradigms that we're in now getting us to where we want to be? Are the
Right.
principles that we're putting in place helping people understand that this is for everyone and not for one person or another? Is this accessible to everybody? Is it unambiguously prioritized and actionable? And is it aligned with who your organization is and wants to be? And then, of course, then what? Where do we go from there? How do we get there together? How do we build that level of connectivity that you mentioned before? And what are all the skills that accompany that? And I kind of gave the first set of skills, but all the other four sets of skills in there are complements of that one, and them being complements of the other. So the nature of the framework is that all of the parts connect and that they build on each other, wherever you might be, and whatever part of it you want to drill down on. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of in a nutshell what it is, and that's why it was really an outgrowth of reconstructing inclusion.
Hmm.
And it was finally where I could codify it in a way that was a lot more easily digestible than reconstructing inclusion, because reconstructing inclusion is relatively long. And I know most people don't read nonfiction books all the way through, but the emergent inclusion framework brings together the theory of change that I've, really been focus on systems over symptoms, focus on context more than content,
Mhm.
focused on the common humanity at the center, making sure we understand networks, making sure we understand cultural intelligence, making sure we understand the interdependent nature of complex adaptive systems. So that's the kind of heart of it, and there's a lot to it. If and of course, if anybody wants to get into the details, I'm always willing to go there.
Well, I'm gonna push for your book. Yes, definitely talk to Amari, but as well, I want you to get the book. And so again, I'll include the title of it, Restructuring Inclusion, Making DEI Accessible, Actionable, and Sustainable. And we will also share this into the chat for those who are interested in having this as part of their library as a resource tool. So yeah, that is where the emergent inclusion framework, it sounds like you do go into great detail about. So I just want to just comment on a couple things that stood out to me about what you shared before. The first is I love the fact that the acknowledgement of when we find ourselves in very chaotic times, there's really two ways to respond to it. We can meet the moment and certainly try to get better and stronger from it, or we can just waddle in our pity and feel like, well, it's me, I can't do anything, right? And I think that from a resiliency perspective, most of us definitely want to see us get to the other side. And so, you use the pandemic as an example, and I think that's a great example. And let me just say that we're going to have another pandemic. I mean, we don't know when, we don't know what exactly, but that's not the end of that. There's going to be more pandemic-like situations, and some will even say that what we're dealing with right now in the U.S. is one of those. And so my hope, just drawing off of some of the inspiration that you just spoke to, is that we all are in a position of wanting to get better from this, wanting to figure out how we can become much more strategic, innovative, creative in our approach as practitioners to really deepening this work in a way that is driving towards meaningful impact. And so I love the framework idea, and I love also how you talk about it as a trade-off, because I think you are right. It does there's merit into us taking a moment to pause and really contemplate on where do we think along the way there were some missteps, so that
Yeah,
as we are trying to position ourselves for doing better because we know better now, that we won't repeat those things. And so this is definitely a space that evolves just like any other space.
yeah.
Um, and I think that's a really just important message for all of us to hang our hats on.
I want to come back to something, Nika, because I think it's important, and
Sure.
I'll tell a story. So one of my spiritual teachers, I picked him up from I used to live in Atlanta, so I lived in
Mhm.
Atlanta for 20 years,
Okay.
and I picked him up from the airport, and we're talking, and I had been going through something with my former business partners, who I love to this day. We're super close, all good, right? But at the
Mhm.
time, I was not happy, and this was not going the way that I wanted it to go. So,
Sure.
so I'm talking to him, and he listens. He's an amazing listener. Um, and we're about to pull up to the house where he was going to stay. And so I'm
Uh-huh.
pulling in there and I'm finishing my story. This is like 45 minutes from Hartsfield Jackson all the way out to Lilburn. So it was a drive, right? So I'm
Okay.
talking almost the whole time, right?
Fine. Okay.
And as we're pulling in, he says, yeah, it's really hard for people to be honest. And I was like,
Mhm.
mm-hmm. See, my spiritual teacher told me about being honest, and I felt really proud. And then about 2 months later, I was like, I'll go back to the conversation in my head. I was like, he wasn't talking about my business partners. He was talking about me. and,
Yes.
and I was like, oh man, was I actually being fully
Mm.
honest about where I was causing the matter of how our relationship was working?
Yeah.
And the reality was I wasn't. And I think right now in our space, we have to be like so incredibly honest with ourselves about where we are.
Very
I'm not
true.
talking about doing some kind of over the top post mortem. I'm talking about just being honest. Like, did this get us what we wanted, even though our
Yeah.
intention was noble? Did it get us where we wanted? And now, what do we do to get there? And what do we need to create together to get there? What kind of conversations do we need to have as a community of practitioners to get there? It's not always going to, we talk a lot about difficult conversations. We need to have them with each other as a practitioner body, very
Yes,
honestly. And it might say this didn't work. And we really went at it as hard as we could. We really believed in this, but it didn't get us where we wanted to be. Let's really sit down and figure out what's next. And I think we're at a really critical point in that regard, because if we hang on to the old paradigms or old principles, they might get us similar results, similar to insanity, doing the same things over and over again,
exactly. Expecting
expecting
different
different
results.
results,
Yeah,
right? So I think that's where that story always comes to mind when I think about the current state and how can we make sure we're honest enough to move to where we want to be, and that people that trust us to come and help them shepherd their organizations, and build that capacity and those capabilities, they know we've really done the deep thinking and we're going to come with the kind of approaches that get them where they want to be.
absolutely. No, I appreciate you amplifying that, and I think you're right. I think that those naming the hard things and even taking a look inward at ourselves independently and collectively as a body of practitioners who've been doing this work and continue to do this work, we have to ask ourselves those things, and we can't let shame to interfere with our ability to trust ourselves and our colleagues to be able to engage productively in this type of dialogue. And the reason that I
Absolutely.
say shame is, think that there are maybe some practitioners who aren't willing maybe to have that hard conversation and name, with great level of trust, the missteps, because maybe there's some kind of shame that's being associated
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
around what has not gone well. But here's the thing: I don't know why we're setting such a standard that is not consistent on the DEI work for other disciplines. Let discipline go through their era of maybe missteps and things that were not necessarily to a standard that yielded the exact outcomes. But we grow, we learn, we innovate, but we keep going, and so there's no shame to naming missteps. I think that's something that needs to be also amplified, because that's probably what's keeping some people from not engaging productively in discussions around where do we go wrong, what do we need to do differently, and how can we
That's it. That's
move
it, Nika.
forward.
I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
it's
about moving forward.
people. I mean, look, I love to be right. It's one of my favorite things.
I think
Okay.
many
But it's
being right
not,
is overrated sometimes.
yeah, and rightness has never transformed anything. And
Oh
so
yeah.
like so if we just are focused on being right either in the past or being right now or being right in the future, we probably won't have very much transformation. And so,
Yeah.
like at this point, I think we're kind of in this place that the place that you get rid of shame and guilt is really completely being kind of nakedly honest with yourself,
Hmm.
and just in ways that is grossly uncomfortable, but it's the
Yeah.
only way you restore your integrity around it, is like being super honest about it and being like, man, that's not getting us where we want to be. It's not, as a practitioner, it's not helping me make money. It's not helping my clients feel like they're not going to get attacked by a silly influencer on whatever
Yeah.
channels he's on. It's not going to have me feeling like, I need to hide what I'm doing because my stuff might smell and I don't realize it smells. It's none of those things. It's like, okay, we're committed to creating the best conditions possible for our people, full stop. Now you can call that whatever you want to, but that's our commitment. And
Exactly.
the people that can help me do it were the same people who were doing that thing called DEI. We don't need to call it that anymore necessarily, or we do. It's up to you. But it's
Right.
helping us get to where we want to be, and we're not going to stop it because we believe in it. And I think if practitioners kind of face that with the kind of integrity that I know that we have, we can move through this and help clients move through it in ways that otherwise I think will stay stuck, because right now there's a little stuckness going on with some folks.
Yeah, there's a little stuck. Yes, there's some who have dug their heels into the sand, saying, "I'm not going to let them win." And in their minds, what winning looks like or feels like is, continuing to use the very language that's been weaponized, that is not breaking through the clutter right now, because the noise is really loud.
It's really
And
loud.
and admittedly, again, to your point, it's really loud, but admittedly, to your point, at one point in time throughout this process, before we really saw true evidence that, okay, there's no turning back off of continuing to weaponize DEI. I was one of those who I kind of felt like, do we really change the language? Because we had woke, we had all the other things, and they took it and weaponized it. So if we keep changing, what does that mean? But ultimately, and this was again through community and connectedness of other practitioners, we all just kind of talked about the fact that what's most important in this moment, and where we reconciled around being most important was continuing to sustain the work. So if that means that we have to get rid of this barrier of not using the words that are so triggering and so weaponized and misunderstood, that people are so misinformed around, then so be it. Let's kind of reimagine the name nomenclature. Let's talk about it in a different way, but still the essence of the work is the work, and what we need to do is get it done. And I want to go back to your point earlier when you were talking about the importance of anchoring intersectionality, and you brought to the conversation that this topic has been so racialized, and for good reasons. We can certainly trace the history, and we can speak to why that was the case.
I mean,
Um,
even intersectionality has been racialized just because of who it came
yes,
from.
all
So
right,
it's like,
exactly.
we're all multidimensional, but when you use the word intersectional, it automatically has a racial undertone because of who it came from, right? So that's
Yes.
even a challenge. I cut you off, but yeah, yeah.
No, no, I appreciate that additional insight. Um, but I think that it's important for us to keep reminding ourselves and others that the dimensions of diversity are so broad. I mean, we can't even really name them all, to be honest with you, but they're so broad and wide, and that we have to become much more sophisticated in how in which we talk about and define diversity. It's not just about age, race, and gender. And I think that the importance of intersectionality entering the equation is that it does help us to see that no one is really one dimensional either. There's so many different factors that make us who we are. And that's the point that I feel like needs to be unearthed in a way that maybe it hasn't fully been given the credit for. But, and then I think about your storytelling of trust. There has to be a sense of safety for us to be able to have those trusting conversations where we're willing to be vulnerable and expose ourselves, our thoughts, our mistakes, right? But that's part of it. And as practitioners in this space, if we can't model that as one of the most important kind of ingredients, within the whole recipe, it's like safety of this work, and feeling a sense of belonging, then how are we going to expect that our words are going to carry a lot of weight when we're going in and instructing organizations and people in the organizations to do this, right? So
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
kind of do it ourselves first.
yeah, exactly. I think that's where I think we could, just being attentive to what kind of those overall needs are, and being able to move away from categorizing people as what's, because it's the boxes. And I had colleague Fred Falker. He talks a lot about the lines that we draw and the boxes that we put ourselves in, and the
Right.
lines and the boxes, they simply, we see them, but they aren't real. So the only thing that makes them real is this.
Yeah,
So
it's
so
true.
those lines, you can call them blurred. I don't want to make any references to the song or anything, but you can. It's you know they don't exist. That we don't sit inside of any boxes, because the boxes put us in a space of what, and we need to
Yeah,
be more focused on who. And
yeah,
that distinction is very important, because otherwise I think a lot of the conversation now has been what conversation, like what group should we not mention in anything, and if you mention that what group, then that has to be blown up, right? We
yeah.
have to
The
take that
banned word.
away, because that's how a lot of people frame the DEI, as a bunch of what's, um doing what what's do. I mean, it feels like a Dr. Seuss book or something, but it's not a what. We're who's. There was actually a Dr. Seuss book about who's too. So I have a 6-year-old, so you can see how that's coming out. But I think if we can get to that point and move into this conversation, Nika, I don't know if you ever heard of Peter Singe's definition of leadership. He said that leadership is the capacity of a human community to shape its future,
I like that.
right? And that means all of us have to be a part of that dance, and that all of us can make a contribution to each other inside of that, because that human community needs all of our leadership to flourish. And so, like,
Yeah.
if we want human flourishing, we need to do it with a lens that all of us are responsible. It's not just the leaders at the top.
Right.
And
We
there's
all.
sometimes there's going to be some people that are more influential that aren't necessarily acting in good faith. You have to
Yeah.
learn, if they have a certain amount of power, you have to learn how you kind of work around them. And then sometimes you have to say, you know what, that's not really helping us make money. That's not helping us get to where we want to be. And let's talk about how we can do this differently so we can get there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of risk and a lot of courage needed in those conversations, but I think we're going to have a more, particularly as, and you've probably seen this, Nika. I know a lot of people got mad at Sherm for talking about civility. Um, but
Yeah.
I think it's probably more important than ever right now, like, because people feel like they have a pulpit to be uncivil. Like, I can be uncivil because I'm getting stuff done. I can be uncivil because people that I respect are doing that. I can be uncivil because somebody else is being uncivil to me. So I think we're at a point now is that we all have to be focused on building our human communities, and that means all of us, and that we need to know that to not do that well and consistently could lead to all the things that a culture of incivility leads to, which are pretty grave and actually definitely don't make you more money. If
Yeah.
that's your
No,
goal, or make you
yeah,
more
100.
efficient, none of that happens when you have a bunch of incivility. So
No, 100%. Yeah. And while I could probably say share a lot of thoughts that I have about SHRM as an organization and some decisions, what I will say relevant to what you just brought up is that civility from a contextual perspective was definitely timely. And it continues to be even more timely. And as I think about at the top of the hour, I shared some of my LinkedIn learning courses. One of the most recent ones was all about navigating hate speech in the workplace, and it was produced in partnership with LinkedIn Learning at a time where we knew that we were uncertain about what the election outcome was going to be, and that people's emotions and anxieties were going to be really high, and that people probably were going to feel a sense of agency to be able to step out of what is normally perceived as respectable behavior, and so it is an important topic that I think organizations need to be doubling down on right now. Let's forget DEI. I mean, let's just talk about how do we treat people with a level of dignity and respect and
yeah, yeah,
civility. And
yeah.
so yeah, I think that needs to be certainly that something that organizational leaders are encouraging, and they are upskilling their managers around to find ways to kind of incorporate that messaging of civility into the day-to-day just workplace. Okay, so we're soon going to be out of time, but I do want to talk a little bit more about a concept that you brought up earlier when you were speaking about your book, Reconstructing Inclusion, and that was when you were sharing, you're really focused on systems change, and then inclusion systems and anti-fragility. So let's unpack anti-fragility a little bit further for this community. I think that this is a topic we don't really delve into as often, and I think it deserves a moment for this conversation. So talk to us about how in which you approach that topic, and what have you seen from centering that into some of the work that you do?
Well, I mean, for those that aren't familiar, Anti-Fragile, the book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, came out, I think, in like 2012 or 13. And what always resonated with me about it is he was like into weight training, into like serious, like deadlifting
Okay.
was the big thing he talked about all the time. And so he used the example of muscle building. When the way your muscles grow is they have to be stressed. You actually tear your muscle down, obviously, and then it builds back up with diet and rest, right? And so in a way, you're always going to have a certain amount of stressors. And some people will avoid the stressors. And
Yeah.
what I'm saying is the avoidance actually makes them more difficult to actually know that these stressors are opportunities versus burdens or versus something that you're, a victim of. It happened. My niece and I talked a lot about anti-fragility after her injury.
Mhm.
And we had this hashtag bounce higher. Like I didn't want her to just get back to where she was because that's resilience. So resilience
Yeah.
gets you back to baseline.
Yeah.
Anti-fragility gets you better. And so, like, can organizations develop the kind of decision making approaches? Can they be always in the process of continuous experimentation? Can they build the level of relational fitness that allows them to work through the tension and complexity with something difficult by not by finding wrong and faulting each other, but coming together across all of our differences and similarities to have the kind of dialogues that allow us to see something in ways that we weren't able to see it before. And so, like, all of that is built into the emergent inclusion framework, but these are things that help you do business better that I happen to put into a particular framework because they've been beneficial to me. They've been beneficial to my clients for a long time, and they've been able to see, when they've had a hard time. One client went through a bunch of acquisitions. They couldn't figure out how to get people to come together on the same page, but a lot of it was like just putting people together so they could talk about where they were in the organizational network so that they could really get these economies of scale that they meant to get with the acquisitions. And it was
Right.
hard. It was actually, people felt like they were losing their identity from their legacy cultures. And so,
Hmm.
like, we were like, no, we want you to honor your legacy culture, talk about all the things that made that culture fantastic and what you would like to see through this act, through these series of coming together under a new roof. It's like you got a new house. It's a big house. You can be
Yeah.
in whatever part you want to be in, but make sure you go to the other parts and visit, right?
Yeah.
And that's what they did. And they did it with values, they did it with kind of the ways of working, how they wanted to design their organization differently. All of that came under that rubric. So, and that's an example to me of them being anti-fragile, to get that hit, that challenge, and be like, okay,
Yeah.
we need to get the right
Yeah.
diet going. We need to rest the right way, but we also need to keep working together. And that's exactly what they did. So that was in London. So yeah, that's what the whole idea is. This the anti-fragile systems can bounce back when you have a hard time. Anti-fragile people are part of anti-fragile systems, and they also know that they're connected with each other. They're interdependent, and so it can't be that I get better and you don't. It's
Right.
that we get better or we
The
don't,
better.
right?
Yes.
And I think that's hard for some people because right now we're being pushed to say get yours. I get it. I want to get mine too, but you usually don't get too far by yourself. And
No.
there's
Yeah.
nobody that has agency that's ever done it alone. So have agency and know that you're part of these human communities that are shaping the future together.
Yeah. So beautifully stated. Bounce higher. Bounce higher. That's what's coming up for me. Bounce higher. I think maybe this community will start adopting that as a tagline to hashtag to add as well. Bounce higher.
I love
It's
it.
Yeah, it's such an incredible word for this moment. And that's what I love about it. I think that it's something that I'm sure has been resonating with a lot of people because what we're finding is that organizations right now are really interested in having people on the team that are able to be resilient, that are able to weather the storm of chaos, that are able to work through the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity, and to be future ready leaders, future proof leaders, because again, we're going to find ourselves continuing to be confronted with situations that, like a pandemic, like what we're seeing right now that feels very unprecedented. And so the more that we could upskill people around that mindset shift, that paradigm shift that allows them to show up stronger, I think that's important. I do have another quick question that's kind of on the opposite end of that I would love to get your thoughts on. When I think about certain populations of people, particularly those who are on the margins, and I've heard this particularly from a lot of people of color, is that, there's this big encouragement right now for this rest revolution, right? For us to not feel so tethered to an idea of having to show up resilient because that is seemingly for some people causing them to feel like you're asking me to do something that is superhuman. And I have for so long had to be superhuman just because of all of the maybe intersecting identities that has worked against me from just coming from a marginalized space. And so, how do people who really want to show up to this moment resilient and adaptable and agile, and again, being able to navigate uncertainty and change, but they also are really feeling the pressure of this notion of, I've even heard some people flat out say, I don't want to be resilient. Don't call me resilient anymore. I need rest. I need ease. I need peace, right? I don't want to be superhuman. How do you reconcile and balance those two tension points?
Hmm. Lean into love and do whatever you have to do to get to where you want to be together. So contribute to each other, care for each other, lean into love. And sometimes you need to just have somebody that's kind of that caring, kind of unconditional space for you. And I think we all have to cultivate that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's exhausting. Sometimes you just be like, I got stuff I would say, but I want to keep this show respectable. But sometimes you're just there, like, screw it, I can't do it. But you're doing this for and with the communities that you're most committed to, and they committed to you, and you keep giving them that care and leaning into it when you need it with them. So I don't think we need to be superhuman. I think we need to be super connected. And if we're super
Yes.
connected, we don't have to go it alone. And that's the only way I know how to bounce higher.
Yeah, it's community and connectedness in order to bounce higher. I love that. Thank you for letting me ask that question on behalf of the 92%. If you know, you know, all the women, the Black women were like, okay, no, we're part of that 92%. We're tired of saving the world. But I know that many feel that way. So thank you so much for allowing me to ask that question. It's not always an easy one to answer, but yes, I have to agree 100% that community and connectedness is what's going to allow us to bounce higher. I have enjoyed this dialogue today. I have really appreciated your insights. I've appreciated the way in which you've shown up with so much richness of perspective that I think that we all can learn from. I want to give you the opportunity to close this out in a way that feels appropriate for you. What have I not maybe asked you about that you have a lot of energy for, that you would love to socialize with this community before we end our time together today?
I think if we are focused on what we want, we'll get it. If we stay focused on what we don't, we'll get it. And
Mhm.
so I think all of us want, thriving communities, thriving businesses. We want to all be able to flourish. And I think we need to start focusing on that, because you brought up earlier, Nika, that there's a lot of noise, and
Yeah.
we have to learn to be signal. And that
Mm.
means we have to listen differently or better. We have to connect. We have to kind of understand the dissent without falling into a dissent. And we need to stay decent with each other in the process. So that's probably my closing is we need to hear what's there, lean into it, understand it. We don't have to agree with it, but continue to move and make sure we don't go into a contentious space, but we bounce higher and we do what we need to do to get to where we sincerely want to be.
Very inspirational words to close this out with. Bounce higher. Thank you so much, Amri, for joining us today. Thank you to our podcast community for being here with us. If you found this content to be useful, please share it out with others. We hope to see you again next week for another episode of Intentional Conversations. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.